Good evening. Hello and welcome to Racial Reckoning at the Kansas City Star, the truth in black and white, presented by the Star in partnership with the Kansas City Public Library. I'm your host this evening, TORIANO Porter, opinion writer for the Star's editorial board. Thank you for joining us for this important virtual conversation. As part of this evening's program, we will take questions from a number of viewers via text. The text line is 816-234-4205. The Star recently came out and apologized for its coverage of the Black community. In its 140-year history, the Star has apologized for its treatment of the Black residents. Our publisher and president, Mike Fanning, wrote about this. The Kansas City Star prides itself on holding power to account. Today, we hold up the mirror to ourselves to see the historic role we have played through both action and inaction in shaping and misshaping Kansas City's landscape. It is time that we own our history. Mike Fanning also wrote the newspaper, both the Star and its defunct sister publication, The Times, had disenfranchised, ignored, and scorned generations of Black Kansas Cityans, while making note of FANNIN treatment of discriminatory practices by developer J.C. Nichols. The Star has since stripped its masthead and website of references to its founder and first publisher, William Rockhill Nelson, who supported Nichols and his policies. Our first question of the day was, how meaningful was the apology from the Kansas City Star to the Black community? Mará, let's start with you.
This was an extremely significant effort by the Kansas City Star. Look, this was more than just an idea from a reporter. This was more than just a story written by Eric Adler, Cortland Stark, Mike Hendricks, or an apology written by Mike Fanning. This was a movement in the room. The failures that we uncovered when we were doing the research for this project, it stirred our journalistic souls. I mean, think about how difficult it is for white America today to accept the notions of privilege and white fragility. Think about how defensive a person gets when you point the finger of racism at them. So the Star is not getting defensive here. We are getting busy. And that's not going to happen overnight. And moreover, what we're doing here is we're stretching out our arms and asking the community to help us do the right thing in the right way. So, I mean, if that's not significant and impactful, I mean, I really don't know what is.
All right. And for you guys who don't know, Michele Williams is a longtime education reporter for the Star. She spearheaded this Truth in Black and White project, and she contributed a great deal of research and writing to the series. I would also like to introduce our other panelists that's going to join us tonight. First of all, let's say hello to Michele Watley, the founder of Shirley's Kitchen Cabinet, a political advocacy group focusing on issues of importance to Black women and their families in Kansas City. She is also a member of the Community Advisory Board. We are also joined tonight by NICOLE Rogers, the founder and executive director of Family Story, a DC-based think tank working to broaden the perspective of family arrangements and models. And of course, the Star's president and editor, Mike Fanning. He has worked for the paper since 1997. He served as the Star's editor since 2008, and he is also the top news executive for McClatchy Central Region. Thank you all. So we'll continue this program. Michele, let's start with you. I know you shared your thoughts on the professional networking site LinkedIn about the Kansas City Star's apology. Would you like to share them to our viewers tonight? You're muted, Michele. You're muted.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, that works. Making my voice heard in more ways than one. Yeah, it was a decision that I didn't take lightly to join the advisory board. And I shared my remarks because I think it was important to both acknowledge the importance of the apology and the work that the Star had done to unearth and to lay bare its misgivings over the last century or more as it relates to the reporting and the storytelling of Black Kansas Cityans. But, you know, I think that we have to walk and chew gum at the same time, that two things can be true, that the apology is significant and a great start, but there's still a lot of work to be done to atone for the misgivings of the past and to set a path to the future that ensures that this type of reporting and essentially neglect and these misgivings don't happen again in the future. And so I'm excited to see that the Star has not only apologized, but did the sweat equity and unearthing its misgivings and going back into the archives and to the sister publication and looking at where they committed wrongdoing in reporting and asserting their power as a source of information as it relates to Black people in the Kansas City region and beyond. I think that's a great start. I think there have been other newspapers across the nation who have also provided apologies in their reporting, but to do the deep dive and pinpoint where the paper went wrong, that's huge. And that can't be ignored. And at the same time, there's still work to be done. And so I'm hopeful and excited to see how the Star continues to roll up its sleeves and do the hard work in atoning for its past and setting a path to the future that we as a Kansas City community as a whole can be proud of and be a part of.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Nicole, your work, your organization has done a bunch of work on issues in the news media and how it affects the African-American community. Can you share a bit about what you found and why does it matter?
Sure, happy to. So we actually did a study that we co-commissioned a few years back with my organization, Family Story and Color Change, that really demonstrated a pattern of news and opinion media bias, which found basically a couple things. One, that news and opinion media overrepresented welfare recipients as Black and underrepresented them as white, overrepresented Black families as being associated with criminality. And then overall sort of, and maybe the most damaging, was really sort of framed Black families as sources of social instability and really portrayed white families as sources of social stability. And, you know, scholars have also documented how kind of racialized stereotypes reinforced by news media have power to shape perceptions and therefore obviously like the decisions we make. So I think it's fair to say that the power of the news media to shape what people feel is normal or abnormal is obviously incredibly strong. And the language we use, we know matters too, as well as the narratives. And, you know, one thing we've also looked at is that there's a lot of terms specifically used to undermine Black people and their humanity. And we released a guide a couple months ago on changing the narrative about Black families that really gets to this. So I'll keep this brief and people can check it out if they want. But, you know, the short story is that we really need to be very careful not to reinforce narratives that blame Black families for the injustices they face, rather than the systems that are responsible for really manufacturing those injustices. So, you know, if you tell a story about Black crime without mentioning, for example, that, you know, Black people are more likely to be both arrested and charged than white people for the exact same crimes, I'd say you're missing a big part of the story. Or if you talk disparagingly about communities with like absentee fathers, which is actually a term we advise against using, you know, without mentioning the role of early deaths and mass incarceration and what the role that plays in removing Black dads from their communities, I also think you're doing readers a disservice, you know? Right. So those are the kinds of things. So I think, you know, in short, white people in particular consume a lot of news that lacks context and empathy for Black communities. And I think we know that certainly has huge impacts.
Right. And it's never easy to look in the mirror and I guess you would say reconcile with your past. Mike, I'm going to bring you in. Why did the Star decide to take this on and issue an apology to the Black community?
Thanks, Toriano. Let me start by saying thanks to the library for hosting this event tonight and for everyone in the audience for coming for what we think is an important conversation. It was a great idea. That's why, in short, and it, I think, proves again the value of listening to your employees. They often have the best ideas. You know, I think, I know Dr. King said it's always the right time to do the right thing. And I think that was the idea that kind of guided principally what we were trying to do here. We were trying to, you know, we're the generation that can stand up and take ownership of this, because the roots, or I should say, the results of it are still seen in, I think, in the city and to some degree in our own newsroom. We investigated 3 major local institutions that have exhibited over decades structural racism, and have been large, you know, very responsible for establishing the systems that we have here in Kansas City. And one was the police department, the other was the fire department, and the last one is the Star. And all of those institutions played a major role in shaping the landscape of the city. And, you know, the results just stink. And you can't really move forward until you do apologize. And I'm glad people appreciated the fact that it was a detailed apology. We didn't expect to do this work and be greeted with pats on the back. You know, it really is the beginning of a new conversation that we hope we can have. But part of what struck me, Toriano, about this is we're doing good accountability stories. We're looking for inequality in our systems and in the institutions that we cover all throughout the city. But we don't have credibility with some communities because as that sort of gatekeeper and watchdog because of the past. And once that template got laid down, we're still trying to undo it. You know, absolutely, to some degree. And absolutely. So once that template got established, you know, you can be as conscientious as you want to be, but until you recognize that infrastructure has been built, and your job is to tear it down, you know, you can't really move forward. So it's part 1, chapter 1, and you know, let's talk again in a year and see where we are.
Absolutely. And as a reminder to our viewers out there tonight, we are taking live questions. And Mike, this question is for you, and it's based on what you just said and what you talked about. Can you explain a little bit more? You must have known that there would be serious criticism that came with this. What would you say to other organizations that might decide it's easier just to do or say nothing and stand pat? And Peter in Missouri asked that question.
Right. I would say what I said in my column. You know, do it. Get the poison out. Get it out there. And like I said, we didn't expect, you know, we got what we thought was a very positive reaction, but we were prepared for 100% negative reaction if that's what it had been, because just by taking the step forward here and offering, you know, we knew it was important to offer this apology with, you know, without condition, without talking about the other good work that we've done. You know, so without condition or qualification, I would say other news organizations need to take a similar hard look at their own history and their own practices and how it affects their, you know, the newsroom of today, because I believe those impacts are there. And I would say that it's been, you know, we've been humbled by the reaction. Ray and I have been very busy over the holidays and into the new year doing lots and lots of these programs. Tomorrow, we're meeting with the National Association of Black Journalists. That's a meeting that I doubt we'd have had on the docket aside from this. I'm doing another program tomorrow with the Society of Professional Journalists International, with a news outlet in New Zealand who did a similar apology. The LA Times came out in September with a similar apology. We didn't know about that when we started working on ours in June, you know, but what I'm encouraged by is this project created a national conversation. You know, I was on the Tapper show. This is like, you know, important. And however we can forward the conversation, I'm thrilled, and we'll take the hits, and we have to be grown-ups, and we just have to take the well-deserved criticism that we've gotten and move on.
Absolutely.
TORIANO, if I may add to that, I think, again, what's also compelling about the Star's apology is that if you compare it to perhaps Truth and Reconciliation Commissions that are brought up in countries across the world to deal with atrocities that have occurred and far greater, again, atrocities, the root of truth and reconciliation is the truth and acknowledgement of the harms that have been caused, a kind of capturing and storytelling process of what actually occurred, and a reckoning and an acknowledgement of the misgivings of whether it be governments or leaders, and how it treated its citizens and the like. And I think that's what makes the Star's apology important. It unearths the perpetuation of racist narratives and not only framing of stories, as Nicole mentioned, but even the absence of stories of the experience of Black Kansas Cityans that had been left off the pages of the Star for over a century. It unearths for a whole segment of the Kansas City community, if you're not Black, essentially every other member of the community, information that they were not privy to, information that has shaped and developed the culture of the Kansas City that we live in today. And so what it does is it sets in motion and makes an irrefutable record of the misgivings of the Star, hopefully so that generations past can see what they've missed, generations of the present can work to create change, and generations of the future can ensure that it doesn't happen again. So there could be no question as to whether media plays a role in wielding its power of information. There are 6 sources of power, and one of them is information. Wielding the power that they hold and access to information to leave out the stories, to perpetuate racist narratives, or to be a conveyor of racist narratives and racism in the Kansas City community and beyond. There's no question that that occurred. And because there's no question that it occurred, hopefully it inspires people to ensure that it doesn't happen again. Not only the Star, but members of the community. Hopefully it provides information voids and gaps that have occurred for people who are not Black to be filled, so that they have a better sense of what the Kansas City culture and community is, because that's what news does. It shapes the culture, it shapes the story, it shapes the experiences of the community that it writes stories about. And, you know, again, Black papers such as the Dispatch Post, the Globe, the Kansas City Globe, the Kansas City Call, they picked up the mantle. They made sure that Black American stories were told by those who lived it, who experienced it, experienced journalists who, you know, fought against racism and lack of resources and means to tell our stories. The Kansas City Call, for instance, has been in existence since the early 1900s. So again, for over a century, they have picked up the mantle to ensure that Black Americans, Black Kansas Cityans were informed. And hopefully that this, again, apology ensures that everyone's informed about what took place so that it doesn't happen again.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Michelle. We're going to take another question from the audience. This is a great one, a great one. Mará, talk more about the specific timing of the apology, and did the events of the summer have anything to do with, as you guys know, there were protests against police brutality all over the country this summer after the death of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and others. Talk about that for us, Mará. You're muted. You're muted. There you go.
Absolutely, the events of the summer played a role. We had a rotation system set up for reporters to cover protests near the Country Club Plaza. And so I had my rotation the night before. I had spent that looking at and listening to news accounts of what was happening in Kansas City so that I'd be prepared going down there. I went to a protest on the Country Club Plaza. And what I saw were, you know, angry protesters, you know, sign-toting protesters, but I also saw like police 3 deep in riot gear, spraying people with chemical repellent. It was a chilling sight for me. I got sprayed with chemical repellent while I was down there covering the event. I was incredibly moved by that, and I was angry. You know, just because I'm a news reporter doesn't mean I shed my blackness. You know, I am Black, and I was angry by what I saw, and I came back and I started thinking, you know, this is a horrible scene. And as I thought more about it, I realized that also what I was seeing was that there were people there that of every race and age group. And I thought, hey, you know what? This is telling me that Kansas City is ready to tussle with race. And maybe I want a piece of that. How can I get involved with that? And I started thinking that it was time. This was the perfect time for the Kansas City Star to look at what it had done in its past. I mean, I was pretty certain that newspapers, not just the Kansas City Star, but newspapers across the country had perpetuated racism in their coverage of Black America. And so I thought, it's time for us to dig deep, look at what we have done in the past and make an apology. When I brought that to Mike and other top editors at the Star, they didn't blink. They actually, you know, said, yeah, let's do this. And we knew, as Mike was saying earlier, we knew going in that we might get some pushback from the community, that we would get criticism from the community, but we were ready to take that on because we knew that it was definitely the right thing to do.
Right. And
so,
I was going to say some people were very critical, but it was a first step. It was a good first step. Nicole, I want to bring you back in. Why do apologies on race matter?
Well, that's a big question. Well, I can't say that I can speak to why they matter for, you know, I think they matter differently, obviously, as a white person experiencing this type of apology than it would be if I were part of the Black community. So there's sort of that dynamic first. But I think my first sort of feeling seeing the apology was both sort of impressed, pleased, and also I would say, you know, a bit surprised. I think it's one thing to apologize for past misdeeds, and it's another to sort of put your money where your mouth is and to devote resources to going back and the Star didn't really excavating sort of old coverage and saying, here's specifically where we got it really wrong, or, you know, only told part of the story. And I would echo a lot of what Michele said, you know, how stories get told matters, sort of the language we use, the framing we use, but what matters equally, I think, is what stories don't get told and whose stories don't get told. And I also think, just sort of back to the apology, I think it's a powerful reminder, to me at least, that, you know, a paper is a historic document and creates a particular record of your region's history. And to sort of revisit and revise that, I think is important and pretty powerful, because it sort of humbly acknowledges that perhaps our understanding of our shared history is really a sort of partial and imperfect one. And to me, that feels very profound. I mean, journalists and reporters are fallible humans like all of us who see things, you know, through the lens of their own experiences. So I think it's important to own and be accountable when we all get things wrong, even if it feels like a long time ago.
Great question. Great answer, I should say. Mike, I wanted to ask you, what's some of the sharpest criticism you heard, and what's some of the, I guess you would say, flowers that has come our way after this apology?
I think the sharpest criticism is this is just another empty apology. This is it's not meaningful. It's the opposite of what has been said here in terms of what other folks think in terms of you know, the meaning and significance of the apology. You know, and again, I accept that, because I don't think you just get to apologize, and whether it's in a business relationship or a personal relationship. You know, I think a long time ago, hopefully all of us learned how to apologize, you know, and I think you have to do that in a thoughtful and detailed way, and then actions have to follow. So I think a lot of the criticism is around what actions will follow this. And we have a number of things that we're engaged in. And, you know, the first one is dropping Nelson's image and words, you know, from our website, and from, you know, scrubbing our history of our founder. That's a significant move, but that's really just a symbolic as much as anything. We you know, And I just want to say thank you to Michele for her consideration and for joining the board, the advisory board that was created out of this project. I don't know if we necessarily spelled that out, but as part of this project, we've created an advisory board that's going to work with us for the next year on on lots of different topics and lots of different issues. And we have our first meeting tomorrow, and we have a full agenda. We're going to be talking about specific things that we're doing, that we want to do, and inviting ideas on what else are we missing and how to move it forward. But you know, I think every investigation has to be judged by its impact, and the impact of this one will be and how we've changed. You know, and I think that you can put a slide rule up to that and measure it. You know, like I said, lots of positive comments in Twitter, especially. You know, kind of similarly picking up some of the threads that Nicole was just talking about there. Again, it was written for a local community. It really, you know, we hoped others would follow suit. We're seeing some movement there. I was just talking to the editor of the Miami Herald today. They're looking hard at this. We've got a call coming up with them where they want to take a hard look at their coverage and maybe do a similar project. I don't want to steal their thunder, so I'll stop there. But you know, that's what we'd like to see happen everywhere. Because that neglect that we're talking about here, it did rob the entire community. First and foremost, you know, the Black community. But we had a chance to help the entire community understand back then. You know, we had a chance to raise the cultural competency of the entire city, and we didn't do it. And so now we're going to have to do it.
Right. And as a follow-up question, I'm going to aim this at you, Mará. What are some of the things you guys are doing on the news side to help strengthen the coverage of the Black community going forward?
I think that part of what my hope, my greatest hope is to what we're doing on the news side is that every day in our day-to-day coverage, it's not enough to write profiles. We will be doing more profiles of prominent African Americans in Kansas City. Yes, we're going to do that, but that's not the long-lasting impact of how this project affects the reporters. What's going to be long-lasting is that we think about those communities that have been marginalized in every story that we decide to do, in every story that we write, in every placement of every story. Those stories we decide not to write, that our thoughts are about those communities that have been marginalized. I mean, it has to become part of the very fiber of what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. It's not enough to just, you know, it's not sustainable to say, okay, we're going to write a story about this, you know, prominent African-American or this Black business. Yes, we will do those stories, and we are planning those stories going forward. But what will be sustainable is when it becomes part of the very fiber of everything we do every single day when we walk into the office, which is now my home, walk into the office to do a story. That is what we're doing on the news side. We, as I said before, that uncovering some of the failures that we saw really did stir the souls of the journalists who were working on this project, and not just those journalists, but our colleagues who we talked to about what we were finding. And so, yeah, that's where you're going to really see the change. It's in the day-to-day. It's not in doing special projects. It's the day-to-day journalism and looking and seeing it completely differently.
Yeah, and as you know, trust in the minority community with the newspaper, The Star, has been broken. And I want to ask Michele this. Do you think reconciliation between The Star and the Black community is possible?
I think it's possible as far as The Star wants to roll up its sleeves and put in the sweat equity to ensure that reconciliation occurs. You know, you can't take back what's already happened in history. How do you make up for 100 years of, you know, bad narratives, not writing about, you know, the Black community. How do you make up for that? You don't make up for that, right? Like what's done is done, but it doesn't absolve the Star or any other entity working to reconcile. It doesn't absolve them of the responsibility to make things right and ensure it doesn't happen again. And again, the apology is a great start. We have to acknowledge that because as a Black woman who reads the news day in and day out, I work in advocacy and communication, so I'm always read the news. The apology was significant and important because it acknowledged an experience that I had. And it, you know, oftentimes Black Americans, Black people are told that racism doesn't exist and you're making stuff up, you're being dramatic. And if you would just play the game and straighten your hair and use proper English, you wouldn't have these issues. If you would just listen to what the police officers' orders are, you wouldn't be shot dead on the street. We're often told that our experience doesn't exist. It's some made up fiction in our imagination. And so again, the Star's acknowledgement ensures that everyone knows this is not made up. And there can be no question about the credibility about the reporting that the Star did, because it came from the very top of the Star leadership. And you all did a deep dive into what occurred. And so that's the significance of the apology. But reconciliation is a path that the Star has to take. It will take years to accomplish. And it is really rooted in the Star's work to ensure that race and equity as a lens is used not only in the outward public facing reporting, but the internal structures and processes that create the situations in which that reporting is born. What is the Star's internal processes on in deciding what pitches and stories get put in the paper? What is the Star's processes and policies around hiring reporters of color who can bring a different perspective? Because oftentimes it's not intentional in the sense that someone is in the newsroom saying, no, we're not going to report about Black people, or we're not going to report about their experiences. I'd say as of late, that's probably not the intention. But when you don't have that experience, you don't have that insight, you don't have the connections to the community, you cannot be a trusted source for ascertaining what stories are important to those communities, what stories are missing, what stories need to be uplifted. And in order to have that perspective, you've got to have people of color, Black people in the newsroom. And so what does it look like for the Star to evaluate its internal processes, policies, and decision-makings around how stories are disseminated, what stories get uplifted, what stories make the front page, what language is used when we're talking about situations that have happened in Kansas City and nationally. And so I think reconciliation can occur so long as the Star, its leadership, its staff, and the community are willing to step up to the plate to roll up their sleeves and ensure that reconciliation happens, and that the work that needs to happen, the actual change in policies, culture, and processes occur so that that change occurs and so that reconciliation can be realized.
All right. And before we move on to our next segment, we have another audience question. This is a really good question. We've spoken a lot tonight, and since the 6-part series ran online and in print, about the effect that the coverage of the Black community. A reader wants to know, what are the plans for the Star to cover the Hispanic, Asian community, and other ethnic groups? Mike, that's for you.
Thanks, Toriano. I mean, in this project, we decided to exclusively talk about the Black community, and I think we had good reasons for doing that. But absolutely, you know, we want to improve our coverage of all communities of color, and you know, that's a very important aspect of this. So you know, that's in fact the advisory board that's part of the mission of the advisory board is. We're not just talking about our coverage of Black Kansas City, but of all Kansas City. And I think that's, you know, I thought Michele just really beautifully summed up a lot of things there and was very realistic about the work ahead and the length of time that it may take to get all this done and get it done correctly. But we're rolling up our sleeves and we're ready to invest that sweat equity and other equity toward, you know, really making our coverage something that we can look back on, you know, 50 years from now and be very proud of. because that's ultimately, you know, we have to be a reflection of our community. And I think that Michelle's points about hiring, you know, and diversity in your newsroom is critically important. You know, in the fall, we hired our first Black editor in about 15 years. And that's just a start. But you can see that in those Star newsrooms of the past, part of the problem is you look at the pictures of those staffs, you know, hanging on the walls, and they were all white. So I do think the Star institutionally had a racism issue, and beyond that, an e-racism issue, because we just erased so many vibrant and important parts of the Black experience in Kansas City in our coverage. So I would say that diversity is critical. And you look at those staffs, and they were all white, and they were led by white men, and that can't be the future.
Hey, Mike, one thing I like about this program tonight is it's a community conversation. I just got a really, really interesting question from a viewer, and I want you to answer this, Mike. Okay, this is what it says. I would like to know if the Kansas City Star has any plans for reparations or wealth redistribution, my bad. After actively divesting from the Black community for decades, they owe it to the community to now reinvest. How do you answer that?
That's a tough question, and I've gotten it before. I got it when Eric Wesson from The Call and I did, you know, KCUR program soon after we published the series. You know, what I can say about that is I don't own the company. It's not my money to spend, and so I think that we looked at this as, you know, as an investment in what we could do. Here's what we can do, you know. You know, when we do something that's a benefit for the community that causes, you know, progressive change that causes improvement, whether it's in the state legislature or city government or whatever, you know, that's really what we can provide and what we can bring to the table as our journalism resource. You know, selfishly, I'd like to think that we've got the most talented newsroom in the city. And we can bring a lot of good things to bear through the use of that staff. So you know, I think that's a larger question for, you know, the McClatchy Corporation and for other for other companies that own newsrooms. I don't think it's a crazy point to make. I understand it. I'm just not in a position to, you know, spend that money. It's like I said, I don't own the company.
Absolutely. And I'm gonna shift gears a little bit. Nicole, if you could rejoin us. What was kind of you're in DC? What was kind of your first thought when you your first reaction when you read about the project?
Well, I thought it was a big undertaking, and I thought it was a brave undertaking in the sense that clearly you are opening yourself up to some anticipation of criticism. When you sort of revisit and own and sort of try to account for your own mistakes. But I don't really see any other path forward for newsrooms than doing things just like you've done. I mean, I think, you know, sort of back to the idea of newspapers as a historical record. I mean, we have to understand that we've shaped a lot of people's understanding of different communities in ways that were biased and very partial and imperfect and that need to be fixed. So, you know, it's just my sincere hope that this type of work is the type of work that other papers continue to emulate.
Right. And Michelle, what was sort of the consensus in your political circles about the project? What's kind of the talk going on now?
Yeah, the reactions were mixed. I got half of the people in my circle congratulate me and half of the people in my circle calling into question my Black card, so to speak, because why would I be helping an organization that had been so instrumental in, again, the degradation of Black people through its information sharing and storytelling? And so I also received a lot of feedback, and it was definitely mixed, I think, and rightfully so. because again, the apology was a great first step, and we have to acknowledge that. I think it was a great first step, the apology and the in-depth storytelling, but there's still a lot of work to do. The question of reparations, when people hear reparations, they often think of dollars and cents and how do we pay people back, but reparations can take a number of forms. Essentially, the root of even the definition of reparations is to help those who have been wronged. And so I think organizations, not just the Star, but other purveyors of information, TV, news, and radio could take a hard look at how they can atone for sins of the past by utilizing their network and resources and platforms to create additional platforms for Black and other people of color stories and speakers and leaders to reshape and to design a future that includes them. If you think about the history of Black journalism, it was rooted in the absence of storytelling in mainstream white media news outlets. Ida B. Wells got her start as a activist journalist because newspapers were not telling the story of Black lynchings back in the day. The Kansas City Dispatch Post, the Globe, the Call all got their start because our stories weren't being told. So yeah, I think that I got mixed reviews, but I'm excited. I think it's a great start. I am optimistic. And while there is some criticism that this is performative and that it's empty, I think that criticism holds true until we see action. And I think the Star has taken good action. The formation of an advisory board made up of community members who are trusted and credible in the Black community is a start. The removing of the masthead is a start. The apology is a start.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, we can't ignore that. Like those are good starts, but there's still work to be done.
Absolutely. What I like to tell people is, we, as an organization, we are now on the clock. Which brings me back to Mike, your statement about the Star hiring his first Black editor in 15 years. That's kind of the big elephant in the room. Diversity in the newsroom. Is diversity necessary for fair reporting? Mike?
Of course it is. I mean, you're just not going to get a true reflection of the community. And it's not just about, Black and brown communities. It's about all kinds of other marginalized communities, LGBTQ, for instance. And I think, you're not going to have the right ideas. If we didn't have Mará working in our newsroom, I just doubt we would have come up with this idea, just to be completely candid. Now, we can share in a good idea once that idea is birthed, and we can all get behind it and all support it, and build a real plan of action outside of it, which is what's happened here. I think that once we heard the idea, it was like, oh my God, why haven't we done this? And there have been efforts over the years. I was looking at something that one of our marketing people shared with me, where in 1998, the Star and the Call did some kind of joint project together to survey, sort of an unprecedented survey of the community. But again, I think it's hard to extend your hand and in a handshake, to the community when you've done what the Star had done in the past, and really never held itself accountable and never said something simple like "I'm sorry." And the example, Toriano, that I want to use here, and just thought of as Michele was talking, one of the pieces that bothered me the most, and there were so many horrible things that we unearthed there, but Black people couldn't place an obituary in the Kansas City Star up until about 60 years ago. I mean, that just shocks me now to this. I mean, on top of all the other horrible things, so the Star didn't recognize the lives of Black Kansas Cityans, and they didn't recognize them when they died. And, one piece I can give you in terms of how we're moving forward is we're going to start to do, and here's the other thing I was struck by. So we wrote that, it all appeared on a Sunday. You go into the obits on that Sunday paper, December 20th, 2020, there were no Black faces. No Black faces on the obits page. So one of the things that we're going to do with our coverage going forward is just honoring some of the folks who do pass in our Black community and honoring Black lives. So I think there are lots of ways that we can begin to pay it forward. You know, and so I completely agree with Michelle's point about reparations.
Thank you. And Nicole, and I understand you wanted to make a point about the importance of diversity in the newsroom.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that, you know, when we put out when we did this big study, sort of looking at media representation of Black people and their families, very specifically, once we released our findings and we had a lot of conversations with people, we got asked all the time, and so we sort of went to a lot of very smart sources to ask this. You know, what is the number one thing we can do to fix this situation? And without a doubt, everybody's first thing to do was diversify your newsrooms. It's the best thing you can do to improve your coverage. And, you know, I think we make a real mistake when we think about diversity as somehow a numbers game, or even more perhaps insidiously as sort of an optics thing. Like we need to sort of have the optics of diversity. No, diversity actually makes a better product. It makes for a better newspaper because people don't know what they don't know. And I think you have to sort of be humble about acknowledging that. And when you bring in people who've had different life experiences, you're going to get, by nature, a richer reporting environment.
Absolutely.
And Nicole, to add to that, it's not only adding diversity to the newsroom, but creating a culture in which that diversity is respected and valued, so that when that diversity is present, it's not like you just mentioned, a checking the box kind of movement. The Kansas City Star has had Black members of the editorial board and news writers and editors, and still does. And so if you can imagine what it's like to see the outward-facing misgivings and missed opportunities, imagine what it's like to be in a newsroom as a Black or person of color reporter, and maybe not feeling like your pitches or what you bring to the news floor is not valued. So it's a dual process of not only ensuring that people of color have a space in the newsroom and in the editorial board and the like, but that they also have a voice that's respected and valued.
I just wanted to jump in, Toriano, just quickly for a second, as working in the newsroom. I know so many times, you know, I would hear white colleagues say, you know, the Black community doesn't trust us, the Black community doesn't trust us. And I think what this project did was help them understand why. Here's why they don't trust you. Here, and this is what we have to repair. And that's why it stirred their souls, because they didn't even realize how deep and how horrible some of the things were. And I think there is a better understanding amongst the reporters in the newsroom as to why we are not trusted and what it is we're trying to work towards. You can't fix something unless you know what it is you're trying to fix. And this project allowed us to show not just the community, but ourselves what it is we need to repair.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that. We had a comment from an audience member again. The Star is a mirror of Kansas City, a city deeply scarred by racism, the Truth Divide, the more formidable Watkins Freeway Divide, a growing north-south divide that uses the Missouri River to segregate communities. How do the Star use this position to help Kansas City heal as a whole? Let's go with you, Michelle.
No, that's a loaded question. I think that, again, taking an internal look at their processes and policies and how they go about understanding stories, corralling stories. Where are your information sources coming from? How they disseminate stories? Who's at the decision-making table? Who's on the editorial board? Again, the editorial board has so much power. They endorse candidates running for office. They speak and provide.
Hold on, Michelle. Hold on, Michelle. I'm gonna need you to say that. Run that back. Run that back. Tell them again.
Run it back. Oh Lord, I don't know how far back I gotta go.
To the editorial board. Let them know what's up. Tell them.
The editorial board wields great power and decision-making power for Kansas Cityans in a number of issues, whether it's who's running for office and their endorsement, political issues that come on the ballot before voters, major issues impacting the nation and the stance. The Kansas City Star is one of the voices for how stories and issues are presented, and where people should land on those issues. And I've seen some great editorial pieces as of late as it relates to race and equity, everything from, you know, the domestic terrorist attacks on January 6th and beyond. And so there's some internal work that needs to happen. There's some reconciliation that needs to occur with the community, with news outlets like the Dispatch Post, the Kansas City Globe, and the Call, and creating opportunities to partner and to make whole what has been torn apart, and again recognizing where there's been gaps. If you are not a Black American in Kansas City, a Black Kansas Citian, you should be equally upset that for close to 100 years you were missing an important part of what is going on in Kansas City. So making up with that community too. I think that the Kansas City Star can begin to position itself as a credible, reliable news source that provides a complete picture of what is going on in Kansas City, that then complements other news sources that Black Americans are accustomed, Black Kansas Citians, excuse me, are accustomed to getting their news sources from. I think it can be done. I'm optimistic. Again, I think that we can walk and chew gum at the same time. Two things can be true at the same time: that the apology was amazing, and that it is an exceptional start, and that there's still work to be done. I appreciate Mike's openness and willingness to admit where there are information voids and where work needs to occur, and what he doesn't know. He has been very forthright about what he doesn't know and what needs to be presented so that he can make you know, the right decisions and create the change that he wants to see. So I'm hopeful for that. But again, it's performative in the sense that until we see more concrete actions, that is just where this stands. And I am hopeful and will do what I can to ensure and contribute to the Star's effort to make this apology more than just words on the front page above the fold.
Absolutely. And that leads us to our next segment, which is, Mike, what's the plan going forward?
Well, like I said, we've got our first board meeting tomorrow, and we're doing a lot of programming. We do have a lot of specific things that we're not quite ready to announce just yet. But, you know, you're not going to see us turn away from this idea. I mean, I think to some degree, you know, we've sort of painted ourselves into a corner here in a really good way, because, you know, I know Michelle's not gonna let us get off with just some kind of performance here. That was certainly not the intent at all. And you know,
we'll
so
work together. Yes, no, I will not. But that's why you asked me to be on this board.
Exactly, because you know, I see a lot of areas for just immediate progress. And then I think we have to be open and humble enough to know that we don't have all the ideas, and we need to continue to dig into what it is that we can do better.
Great. Hey, Mará, I want to ask you, how can the people judge the Star's effort to make amends with the Black community?
How can they judge it?
Yep. What's the measuring stick?
The measuring stick is reading the Star every day, and the type of response you get when you see something in the Star that maybe you don't agree with, or that you think was incorrect, or that we missed something, and you pick up that phone or you type that email and you talk to a Star reporter or somebody from the editorial board. The kind of response that you get back from, you know, the reporter and the Star, and the fact that we're listening and that we want to hear what you have to say. I mean, so many times I've talked to a reader who calls, and they call and they're screaming at me about something that maybe I either missed or didn't get quite right, or that they didn't agree with or didn't understand. And after I finish talking to them and they understand that, oh, I am interested in what you have to say, and I want to tell your story, and I want to get it right, and if we work together, we can do that. By the time that conversation is over, they're like, there's a trust that is built, and you can do that within 5 minutes. So I think that the measuring stick is going to be what you see coming out in the Star, the response you get from the people you talk to at the Star, whether you're seeing reporters in the community at your events. Are they present? You know, do we show up? Are we showing up? Those are the things that are going to be the measuring stick. And like Michele said, that's going to take time. Over time, you'll be able to determine whether the Star is actually doing what it said it's going to do. So you're going to have to, what you hear, see, and whether they're there. Can you call in the Star and talk to somebody who's listening to you and cares about what you're saying? That's going to be the measuring stick. It's not going to mean that every story we write about the Black community is going to be a fluff piece. That's not going to be happening. But it's the response you get. That's what's going to be the measuring stick for each individual. Absolutely.
And real quick, Nicole, did you want to add anything? I wanted to ask you, what can we do as a second step or a third step here, follow up? What it looks like from your end?
You know, I can't speak. I don't work at a newspaper, and I'm not from Kansas City, so I cannot speak for sort of the specifics of what should happen in newsrooms. But I will say what strikes me as a person who does a lot of sort of research around sort of race and media effects and thinking around this, I think one of the things that needs to be reframed pretty desperately and is this idea that a few folks have touched on. I know Michelle touched on this, but you know, the idea of who's harmed by the past coverage and who's harmed by sort of biased media in general. And I think if we have to be careful of both honoring the way that damage has been caused to Black communities in this respect, and also acknowledging that the harm is also to non-Black people, white people specifically, you know, and I think that's about telling a totally different story that says if the news you consume and you read every day as a white person does a caricatured version of Black people or doesn't give them their full humanity, tell their full stories, you are the one missing out. You are missing out on the richness of some experiences that maybe you don't understand.
Absolutely. That's great. Preaching to the people tonight. Nicole, thank you for that. So we're just about out of time. I just want to take this time to thank our panelists for an insightful and constructive conversation. But before I go, I just want to ask Michele, who, as we talked about tonight, is a member of the Community Advisory Board of the Kansas City Star. Michele, can you tell us why joining that advisory board was important to you?
I'm sorry, Toriano, could you repeat that question?
Can you explain to the people why joining the Community Advisory Board was important to you?
Oh, yeah. It wasn't a decision that I made lightly. I think that in this space where a number of organizations are looking to and are in the space of reckoning with their past as it relates to race and equity, that there's a sense that bringing on Black people who are leaders in the community and have the respect and reverence of members of the community is one way in which they can atone for past misgivings through the labor and intellectual, contribution of Black folks. And so I'm trying to be, as the founder of Shirley's Kitchen Cabinet, a nonprofit named for Shirley Chisholm, who said that if they don't give you a seat at the decision-making table, bring a chair. I have to be mindful about where I contribute and where I lend, whether it be expertise, life experience, and perceptions to the work of undoing the harms done by racism and inequity in systems and processes. But I had to think about it, and I had to harken back to Shirley Chisholm. A seat at the decision-making table doesn't mean that you're going to be at decision-making tables that you want to be at, or that embody, the setup that you dreamed of. Being at the decision-making table sometimes means that you have to create your own tables, which that's some of the work that we do at Shirley's Kitchen Cabinet. And I've done personally as a Black woman, like creating my own tables has been a source of providing a platform and creating change. But sometimes it's sitting at tables where difficult decisions need to be made and real work has to be done. And that requires your expertise, life experience, and your insight. And what I appreciate about the advisory board is it serves as another check and balance to the work that the Kansas City Star does. And it's a check and balance that they didn't have to create. They could have simply come out with this apology, this deep dive, went with, you know, their editors of their choosing, and moved forward, but to select community members who they know would not be silent about the work that needs to occur, that won't be bashful about the next steps, and will hold the Star accountable, I think is a huge step. And so that's why I decided to be a part of the advisory board. And I envision my role as providing advice and insight and inroads. But again, I don't work for the Star. I have a background in communications. I have a degree in communications. My first published piece of writing was with the Kansas City Call. And I interned for the Kansas City Star way a long time ago. And so while I have experience, I don't work for the Star. It's up to the Star to make the changes. But I think it's significant that they asked me and other leaders to be there, to be that voice and to be that additional check and balance in the work that they do going forward to reconcile for the sins of commission and omission of the past.
Michele Watley with Shirley's Kitchen Cabinet, Family Stories, Nicole Rogers, Kansas City Star education reporter Mará Williams, and Star president and editor Mike Fanning. Thank you so much for engaging in this meaningful dialogue with the community. Lively discussions like these can only help move this great city forward. I'd also like to thank the Kansas City Public Library, who is supporting this important conversation. Make sure you download the library's book, Kansas City Black History 2021, a joint effort between the library, the Black Archives of Mid-America, and the Local Investment Commission link. Finally, if you enjoyed this program, feel free to share it on social media. A recording would also be available on kansascity.com and the Star's YouTube channel and main Facebook page. Thanks to everyone who joins today's discussion. We will continue to have meaningful conversations in the coming months. We hope you will join us. For everybody here at the Star, I'm TORIANO Porter, opinion writer for the Star's editorial board. You have a good evening. Thank you.